Why weren't the kids in bed by 8 like we agreed? Looks like a question, has a question mark and everything. It is not actually a question. Read it again. It doesn't ask what happened. It doesn't ask if something came up. It states as settled fact that you broke an agreement and then dares you to explain yourself inside that frame. Answer it directly, and you've already agreed you did something wrong before you've said a single word in your own defense. It's a verdict wearing a question mark as a disguise, and answering it like it's genuinely asking something is exactly how people get pulled into arguments they never agreed to have. Divorce Smarter with Claude. Episode 8. When a question isn't really a question. Some messages during a divorce are genuinely questions. Someone doesn't know something and wants to know it. Those are easy. You answer them. Others are shaped like questions, but built to do something else entirely. Establish a version of events, imply fault, or get you to confirm a fact that will be used against you later. Why weren't the kids in bed by 8? Already assumes you failed at something, already assumes a rule existed exactly the way they're describing it, and already assumes you owe an explanation. All of that is baked into the sentence before you've said a single word back. Other common shapes worth knowing: did you really think that was appropriate? Isn't asking your opinion. It's telling you your judgment was wrong. Do you even care about what's best for them? Isn't asking about your priorities. It's asserting that you don't have any. Strip the question mark off any of these and read what's left as a plain statement. That's usually the actual message being sent. The tell is usually this: a real question is curious about an answer it doesn't already have. A loaded one already contains its own conclusion, and the question mark is just there to make you feel obligated to respond to it. Here's what makes these so effective. The moment you answer on the terms it was asked, well, actually they were in bed by 8:15 because you've already accepted the premise. You're now defending your parenting inside a frame someone else built for you, instead of questioning whether the frame was fair in the first place. And it rarely stops at one exchange. Answer the first loaded question fully and thoroughly, and you've taught the pattern that it works. The next message tends to arrive with 2 questions instead of 1, each slightly more pointed, because the previous round proved you'll engage on these terms if asked the right way. Every detail you offer to defend yourself becomes something that can be picked apart, quoted later, or used to establish that you engage in exactly this kind of back and forth. The instinct to explain yourself thoroughly, the same instinct Biff and Greyrock both ask you to manage, is even stronger here, because the message is specifically engineered to trigger it. The move is to separate 2 things that got glued together on purpose: whatever legitimate logistical question might actually be buried in there, and the accusatory framing wrapped around it. Sometimes there's a real question inside, and it deserves a real, brief answer. Sometimes there's nothing in there but the accusation itself, dressed up to look like it's asking something. Once you can see those as 2 separate things instead of one message, you can decide to answer the first and simply decline to engage with the second, without owing anyone an explanation for that choice. Take the bedtime example. Buried inside the accusation might be an actual, reasonable logistical question, something like whether bedtime routines need to be discussed and agreed on more clearly going forward. That part is worth answering, briefly and factually. The part where you're being asked to justify one specific evening, as if a single late bedtime is evidence of something larger, doesn't need an answer at all. This kind of message is genuinely hard to read clearly when you're the one it's aimed at, because it's designed to produce exactly the defensive reaction that makes it hard to think straight about. An outside read helps. There's a reason this is harder to spot from inside your own inbox than it looks watching an example on a screen right now. When you're not the target, the pattern is obvious. When you are, adrenaline shows up first, and analysis shows up a distant second, which is exactly why having something else do the first read is useful here in a way it isn't for a straightforward logistics email. Claude is useful here for 2 specific things: pulling apart what's actually being asked from what's being implied, and helping you draft a reply that responds to the real question, if there is one, without accepting the framing around it. Use this to figure out what you're actually dealing with before you respond to anything. I received a message from my ex that's phrased as a question, but I suspect it's actually making an accusation or assuming fault. I'm going to paste it below. Break down what's a genuine logistical question, if any, versus what's an assumption, an implication of fault, or an accusation dressed up as a question. Be specific about which parts are which. Paste the message underneath. Seeing it broken into pieces on the page is often enough on its own to make the whole thing feel less personal and a lot less urgent. Often the breakdown itself is the most useful part, more than anything that comes after it. Watching a message get separated into genuine question, none, and implied accusations, 3, does something a gut reaction can't. It turns a feeling into a list, and lists are a lot easier to respond to calmly than feelings are. Once you know what's real and what's framing, this drafts the reply. Help me draft a brief reply to this message. Answer only the genuine logistical question, if there is one. Don't defend, justify, or address the accusation or implied fault. If there's no real question at all, just underlying accusation, suggest whether this needs a reply or whether it's better left alone. Notice that second option is on the table. Plenty of these messages don't actually need an answer because there was never a real question inside them to answer. An important boundary. This isn't about accusing your ex of manipulation in your reply, calling out the tactic, or explaining to them what they're really doing. That just opens an entirely new argument about intent, which is even harder to resolve than the original one. I notice you're trying to trap me into defending myself is itself a loaded question dressed up as an observation, and it will very likely get treated exactly like one. The strength of this method is quietly declining to play, not narrating that you've noticed the game. It's also not licensed to assume bad faith every time. Sometimes a clumsy, badly worded message really is just a clumsy, badly worded message from someone who's stressed too. The method here is about protecting yourself from the pattern when it shows up, not about diagnosing motive every single time someone sends you something imperfectly phrased. If this keeps happening, the same shape of message over and over, that's no longer just an awkward text. That's a pattern worth having visible for your lawyer, not something to solve entirely on your own. A single loaded question is an annoyance. 10 of them, dated, saved, and laid out side by side, are evidence of a communication pattern. And that distinction genuinely matters if this ever needs to be discussed with a lawyer or referenced in mediation. One message rarely changes anything. A documented pattern sometimes does. This connects back to Episode 3's document system. Save these messages in your correspondence folder as they come in, dated, without editorial commentary attached. A pattern is far more persuasive laid out plainly across 10 messages than described from memory in a single frustrated phone call to your lawyer. That's 3 tools now in the right track. BIFF for someone responsive to clarity, Gray Rock for someone who isn't, and this one for messages built to trap you into defending yourself. Later episodes move into the prepare track, getting more out of every lawyer meeting and mediation session you actually pay for. Together, these 3 cover most of what actually lands in an inbox during a divorce. Straightforward but tense, that's BIFF. Relentless, regardless of tone, that's Gray Rock. Innocent looking but loaded, that's Today. Most difficult messages fit one of those 3 shapes. If a message like this is sitting in your inbox right now, that's the one worth running through today's method before you type anything back. Not every question deserves an answer on its own terms. You're allowed to notice the difference, and you're allowed to only answer the part that was ever really a question. That's not evasion. That's just refusing to argue a case nobody actually asked you to make. One step at a time. See you in the next one.